Alright, I was gonna skip this review to work on some Final Fantasy VII stuff, but let's do it. Endless Dungeon is the newest game from Amplitude Studios, which is owned by Sega, and it is not the sequel to Dungeon of Endless. Again, it is not a sequel to Dungeon of the Endless, but rather it's something that takes place in the same universe, and while they're both roguelikes and share some common aesthetics like defending the crystal and having similar resources, the games are very, very different. Dungeon of the Endless was much more dark and brooding, and at times almost being more horror-like. It was also more strategic with your tactics and resource management in your defense. Now this new game, Endless Dungeon, it's much more lighthearted and filled with humor as opposed to the last game.
Lock and load, ladies!
And instead the gameplay is more actiony, it being an isometric twin-stick shooter, which I guess that's a term now, that only has the elements of dungeon defense, resource management, and tactical gameplay, which means these two games have very different gameplay feels and loops, which is one of the reasons this game is getting hated on so much right now, along for a handful of other reasons though that I'll get more into later on in the video. That said, I'm strangely enjoying it. The setup here is that you're on a mysterious space station that various alien races have landed on and crashed into, and now they're stuck in this endless loop of exploring this mysterious space station so they can reach the core and unravel the mysteries within it. However, the space station is of course filled with terrible monsters that will eat you, and once you get eaten, well, you respawn in the saloon in the space station only to be forced to try once again. And the overall gameplay loop here is pretty simple. You grab a team of up to 3 characters, each with a passive, an active, and an ultimate ability, and set out with Krabby, which is a robot holding a special crystal that basically functions as your tower that you need to defend, and you have to move him to the end of the dungeon. And you will move room from room, gathering resources and building up your defenses, sometimes your characters, and you'll find treasure and weapons, and of course you'll be meeting enemies and their nests.
Breach!
I started blasting. Bang! Bang! Well, I don't see so good, so I missed. Then they ran away. I ran after them.
Okay.
Bang! Try to shoot them in the back.
Now after you've opened up enough rooms, or just a set amount of time has passed, these enemy nests are going to start spawning waves of enemies that come at you in droves trying to pursue Krabby, which of course you have to defend this poor little guy. And once you clear out the waves, you'll then move on to the next room and the next room until you eventually reach the exit. You will then need to instruct Krabby to open the exit room door. But when Krabby is not installed into the floor or any installation, the enemy waves will keep repeatedly coming forever until Krabby opens the door or he dies. So as mentioned, you'll be defending him with your characters, as well as building turrets at choke points to help you buy enough time so that Krabby can open the door and move you on to the next room. And you'll keep doing this until you reach the core of the spaceship, and you'll encounter 2 bosses on the way as well. Now when it comes to your character's abilities, some will buff or heal other heroes, some will just cause stats effects like slows or stuns, and some will just be straight up damage. And this is probably a me thing, but I actually kept forgetting that I had active abilities for a while. Maybe it's because the UI just doesn't display them enough and I kind of just forgot they were there, but yeah, you should probably definitely use these. Each character also starts out with a basic weapon, and then you can eventually find a second weapon within the dungeon. However, each character is assigned to only specific weapon styles, be it a hand type weapon or a heavy weapon, which means some characters are using the exact same basic weapon, which kind of makes them feel similar when you're not using the abilities. And the heavy and the hand weapons both have some similar things to them, as they'll have single shot weapons, scatter shot weapons, a charge shot, and an automatic fire. And there are a couple unique weapons, but there's not too many. And weapons can also have a chance to have elements attached to them, be it the basic non-elemental, fire, acid, light, or electricity. And these elements are actually pretty important because each enemy will have their own weaknesses as well as resistances. And on top of using your weapons to kill enemies, you'll also be placing turrets down. So when you start your run, you only have the very basic turret. Eventually though, you will use your science research in order to research and develop other new turrets and upgrade and level up the ones you have. And these turrets all have a varying different method of attack, be it AoE or range distance or elemental damage, and some grant buffs to heroes or other turrets. And you can also melee turrets to give them temporary buffs as well to make them more efficient. However, like my abilities, I sometimes forgot I could do this. Now you can only build your turrets on builder blocks, and these will be sprinkled throughout the map, and so throughout the game you're going to be placing turrets at certain choke points as well as your characters in order to protect Krabby and get him safely across the map. And while some of these floors seem to have the same basic layout, location of the build points and the exits and the enemy nests all seem to be a little different every single time, so there's a little bit of good RNG here. Now each enemy has an element they're resistant to and weak to. However, there are only 4 types of enemies, each of these brought to you by the letter of the day.
What's the letter? What's the letter? What's the letter? What's the letter?
The letter of the day is B.
It's the letter of the day.
You got the bugs, blobs, blots, and blurs. And each of these four do have different styles of enemy within them, and they tend to act somewhat differently. Like the bugs tend to Zerg rush you more, and the blobs have a lot of armored units, and the blurs can phase in and out and just walk past you sometimes, which is scary. So there is some diversity here, but maybe not enough, which seems to be a reoccurring theme throughout this game. Because when it comes to the weapons and the enemies, there's just a feeling of wanting more. There's enough to be diverse, but some of the aspects of them just feel a little too similar and not quite unique enough. The same can also be said how your characters level up and progress. Most of the upgrades are just stat shifting, like adjusting things like your rate of fire, your movement speed, or damage output by X percentage. There's nothing visually striking that really happens when you level up, or anything unique that happens outside of a few outliers. For example, Blaze's main abilities focus around the use of his mines, but he doesn't really get anything interesting that happens to them when he levels them up. Yeah, they can do more damage, sometimes do a slow when they explode, or give him more crit the more he has laid out, but there's nothing visually different here striking. Whereas when you level up Bunker, she eventually gets a unique ability that lets her aggro all the enemies around her within a specific range, which is just way more powerful, way more unique, and something tangible that you actually see throughout your runs. Now there are some permanent buffs you can give your heroes through the saloon, and these come in the form of chips, and you have to unlock chip slots by completing missions with each character, which is kind of fun and a way to flesh out the characters, and I did enjoy that a little bit. But again, these are mostly just stat shifters. Now through the combination of the chips and the level buffs you get throughout your runs, you can get some builds going, but again, the variance really isn't there that much. Usually it's just they'll start getting a little bit better at a certain element maybe, or they'll be better off in a group or alone. Now you can also upgrade weapons permanently through the chip usage, but again they're just kind of stat shifting and just overall enhancing the weapons. They're not really changing them in any meaningful or unique way outside of raw numbers. There are a few other unlocks that you do get through the saloon other than just buffing up your characters and weapons though. Like you can unlock a band that will play music for you every now and then. You get an information center, which is where you get the story unlocks and reveals, and the bestiary, and start unraveling the mysteries of the space station. Additionally, you start unlocking drinks, which are much more bigger and unique changes to certain aspects of the way the game functions, which these function more as like the extra challenge mode. Doing things like medkits don't heal you anymore, they just make you temporarily invincible, or reducing your hero damage but increasing turret damage, and so on. Now at the start of every run, you actually do get to select the difficulty. I've mostly played on normal, but I did dabble in hard mode a few times. On hard mode, the resources you get are significantly lower, and you also have a higher chance of finding more elite enemies, but they just have more health and move a little faster. But you do get a little bit extra rewards. That said, the first couple floors usually aren't all that hard. There's been times where I've been able to clear these early levels without even using any turrets at all. Usually after you beat the first boss, things start to get more difficult, and you actually have to start planning out the proper order you want to open rooms in, figuring out what choke points you want to use, and how you're going to manage these waves of enemies that keep flooding towards you. As if you're not careful, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. And for bosses, I still haven't beaten the final one yet, but I usually find myself dying to bosses just because I didn't know what they were doing, or I didn't know they were on a boss field, which isn't really fun when that happens. That said, I'm still having fun with the game, but I don't think it's amazing by any means, but it seems like a lot of folks are having some major issues with the game. I've been playing on PC and I've gotten pretty much 0 crashes and only a few minor bugs, things like turrets freaking out or some frame drops when importing the game footage, but nothing too severe. But there are some reports of people losing their save files, the game crashing, and other game-breaking bugs like Krabby getting stuck and not being able to move, or the AI just being broken and not functioning correctly. And while I haven't seen or experienced any of these things, there has been plenty of footage floating around of it, and most of it does seem to be footage from console gameplay. Additionally, I haven't played co-op because I don't have friends and I don't trust random idiots to not run around and spam opening doors constantly. But a large issue people are having is that character progression is only tied to the host, but the devs have addressed this and said they're working on fixing it, and apparently this isn't completely true. From my understanding is that you can progress on characters, but you just can't progress on characters you haven't unlocked yourself. Some complaints I do have though is that grabbing and interacting with items on the ground can be really tricky at times and cumbersome. It can be hard to select what you want, and when things are too close to each other, it gets really hard to pick what you want to pick. Like if a builder spot and a lore spot are too close to each other, you just might not be able to access one. And I've had a couple times where I've bought a weapon from the shopkeeper to have him drop it on the ground, and I can't pick it up because when I try to pick it up, I just keep interacting with him. And I also feel like the character abilities just lack a little flair, and character progression overall seems kind of weak. It'd be cool if each character had skill trees where they could enhance their various abilities different ways throughout your run. Maybe even giving each character a unique turret to them that they can level up in different ways and give some unique ways to modify your abilities. Some things just feel way too similar and there's not enough uniqueness, and something to make the guns feel different from each character, as a lot of them feel the same and need a little something to spice them up. This game just really feels like it has a lot of layers that could be added to it, overall enhancing the experience. Just like how if you like, comment, and subscribe on this video, it would enhance your overall experience. Overall, I just feel like this game needs a little bit more characters, some new enemy types, more weapon designs, adjustments to character growth, and bosses with different variations. Also, it doesn't really feel endless at all, despite the name. I get that it's the branding thing, but I feel like they should have leaned into this somehow. And even though I am being negative right now, I do enjoy this gameplay loop, and I like playing the level and figuring out where the choke points are going to be and where I need to move Krabby and my comrades and the proper choke points for the turrets and just the overall vibe and aesthetic of the game. And while a lot of folks were hoping this game would be more dark and brooding like Dungeon of the Endless, I kind of like the more jovial and fun characters, as they have a lot of charm to them. And even though their voice lines can get a little repetitive at times, I always just enjoy when I open a door with Bunker and she drops her line.
We have a warrant.
I think overall this game just needs some post-release love, and the devs are already listening to us a little bit as they've addressed some of the co-op concerns and are working to fix those. They're also doing a weapon design community event, which is kind of cool. But while it feels like there's a lot of potential here, it does feel like I paid $30 for a beta test. I think if this game gets fleshed out a little bit more, it'll be a great pickup on sale down the line, but right now it's in a rough place. Not a terrible place, but a rough place. And I do plan on playing it a little bit more, but I don't know, I just want more from this game, and I feel like if I didn't like it, I wouldn't want more. I would have just dropped it. And it seems to be like what a lot of people did, because they took a popular franchise that had unique gameplay, a unique art style, and a unique atmosphere, and they completely changed it into something new, and that something new might not be for everyone, and the gameplay can kind of devolve sometimes into just standing around, holding a button, and watching your character shoot away. And while that only happens at the early levels, I don't think people enjoyed it enough in the beginning to push through that and start to see the more complex features of the game start coming out. And even then, it doesn't get too deep. But let me know what you think of the game. Do you like it? Do you hate it? What might you want to see later on down the line? That's all I got. Later, nerds.